I think that's undoubtedly an expansionary budget, which is going to put upwards pressure on interest rates and make the Reserve Bank jobs harder. And look, that's not just a political point. If you look at what all the economic analysts and commentators are saying today, they all draw the conclusion that the budget's expansionary. It's going to put upwards pressure on interest rates, and it's making the Reserve Bank's job fighting inflation more difficult.
How do you walk that line otherwise when there are so many demands in the community, whether it's, of course, increased spending on domestic violence or so many other supports? We have a cost of living crisis. How do you try to make sure that you meet people where they need that help and yet don't cause inflation to go up?
Well, you've got to remember that, a large cause of why people need help is because, interest rates have gone up 4 percentage points since Labor came to government. Cost of electricity has risen by double digits. Cost of food and groceries has gone up. So inflation is the big problem, which is driving a higher cost of living. And so the primary purpose of the budget, of fiscal policy, is to help get inflation down, and that will make it easier. The risk is that you put more money back into the economy as the government to alleviate the cost of living crisis, but all you're doing is treating the symptoms and not the causes, and in fact you make the problem worse. As you said in your introduction, I think one of the biggest cost of living reliefs would be if the Reserve Bank lowered interest rates, but for it to be able to do that, some of the heat needs to come out of the economy, and this budget does not deliver that.
Of course, there's been much criticism of the $300 energy bill in the fact that energy bill relief, I should say, it's going to every household, regardless of your income. It is not means tested. Indeed, if you had multiple households, say you had a holiday home, you would get the energy bill relief on that extra household as well. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, in the Press Club address today, articulating that it's basically the most efficient way to get that energy bill relief out there because other than, say, pensioners and concession holders, there is no mechanism to differentiate and do that means testing. Do you accept that explanation as why it's happened this way?
Well, look, I'd say first of all that yes, $300 off people's electricity bill is good, but this government came into office promising a $275 reduction in people's power bills, and in fact they've seen it go up more like $700. Electricity prices are up by about 18%. So this is sort of a band-aid on what's quite a big and gaping wound. I'm a little uncomfortable with it not being means tested. You point out the example of people who have a second home or a holiday home, they're getting this rebate twice. People who don't need this assistance are getting it twice. I heard Jim Chalmers' explanation today about the data sharing arrangements between the ATO and electricity retailers, but I would point out that the last round of electricity price relief or energy relief was means tested that the government announced in the last budget.
Well, it wasn't specifically means tested. It was based on whether you were a concession or pension holder or pension holder.
But it was targeted towards the most needy people in our community.
Sure, but the point...
People on fixed incomes.
The point the Treasurer was making is that once you then start getting into making a difference, trying to identify whether you're a middle income earner or a high income earner, that mechanism just does not exist.
Well, look, it might not exist now, but I think the government has been planning this budget for 12 months. I suspect they've been planning to hand out energy price relief for some time as well. If that mechanism didn't exist and the government does believe in means testing this, then they should have been able to design that mechanism. The data all exists, of course. The ATO knows what tax bracket people are in. The government can make a decision, just as they did with the stage 3 tax cuts, about what they consider to be high or middle or low income earners, and they can target that assistance accordingly. So, Jim Sharma is saying the systems don't exist. Well, it's incumbent on the government to actually build those systems, especially with the lead time they've got.
We're just having a conversation on air with the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, talking about the Future Made in Australia Fund, $22 billion over 10 years to incentivise new industries. We even think that we'll see quite a bit of that in Newcastle and the Hunter, including SunDrive, wanting to produce solar panels right here in the Hunter at the site of a former coal-fired power station. Are you going to support this fund?
I think we need to see more details about the investment case, but I think our view as a Liberal Party is that we want to make sure that any government money that's going into supporting an industry that will ultimately be commercially viable and can stand on its own 2 feet. And this is the difficulty when government gets involved in picking winners or picking sectors or supporting specific projects. Australia's got a long history of interventionist industry policy, which we only really left behind in the mid-1980s under the Hawke and Keating governments. And we need to be careful we don't go down that trap again. So I would really want to see the business case for everywhere where these dollars are going, to be convinced that there is a reason why private capital is not investing in these opportunities, what that reason is, and why we are convinced that government capital will make them commercial if private capital doesn't think they will be.
To be fair, though, that was the approach of the former coalition government, to pick particular winners when it came to the energy sector, throwing money at things like carbon capture and storage, despite it not necessarily being a proven technology.
Well, I'd say in areas where there are externalities that the market doesn't currently capture, there is a case. We had a government case, and there's a public policy case for government intervention to help lower our emissions profile. But a large part of this is not necessarily about lowering our emissions profile. It's about onshoring goods which are equally available overseas and which we can buy readily from overseas. Now, if there's a national security imperative or a kind of resilience imperative, then yes, there's a case for public money to be made. But I mean, the Treasury's papers on this initiative themselves make the point that solar panels are made at scale and very affordably in China, of course, but also increasingly in India, in Europe, in the United States, North America, all suppliers that would be readily available to us. And Treasury is not convinced, at least, of the business case for this for solar cell technology being manufactured here in Australia.
It was confirmed that New South Wales would receive $1.9 billion less next financial year than previously forecast under the GST carve-up. As the Liberal Senator representing New South Wales, are you concerned about that?
Look, I am concerned about the GST carve-up more broadly. I mean, I think there were good reasons why the deal was done with Western Australia a few years ago, but I think with commodity prices where they are and the windfall revenues they are delivering, especially for resource-rich states like Western Australia and Queensland, there is a risk that other states are being sort of disadvantaged by this new formula. Now, I don't think I can offer you a solution on air today, but I think the kind of federal-state relationships and the carve-up of the GST does need to be looked at again, yes.
We've heard some detail around the caps that could be placed on international students coming to visit on our shores. Of course, we have many international students that come to study at the University of Newcastle. Know that the migration number overall is of concern to the opposition. Are you welcoming this idea that it's got to be pegged to how much student accommodation a university can build?
Look, I'd say, I'm a big supporter of foreign students coming to Australia because, one, it's a great export earner, but two, it's also a means of building linkages with other nations and ultimately helping our trade and economic performance and understanding and, our place in the region and the world. I think the broader point is, though, that when housing approvals are so low, we need to be careful about what our overall migration intake is. And we've seen, in the budget papers, we're expecting, I think, 1.7 something million new arrivals over the next 5 years. We know we've taken about 900,000 in net overseas migration over the last 2 years. And that's at a time when housing affordability is at an all-time low and when housing approvals, the rate at which we build new homes, is also at an 11-year low. Now, I think until we get on top of our infrastructure needs and home affordability, we need to be scaling back, having a lower rate of migration, net overseas migration, which includes temporary arrivals like students, than we've had over the past 2 years.
All right, just finally, we are still waiting for the opposition to outline their nuclear power policy. Of course, we have the understanding that old coal-fired power stations could be designated as potential sites for them. Is that policy forthcoming?
Look, it will be coming soon. I mean, I must say, I'm not going to be able to give you a scoop here today, Paul, on exactly when it's coming or what's contained in it, but we are doing a lot of detailed work, the relevant Shadow Minister, Ted O'Brien, and some of his colleagues about, cost, commercial viability, location, safety, how it would fit in the existing grid, all those sorts of things. So I don't know when those details will be released, but it will certainly be before the next election.
Do you think it's going to work? Do you actually believe in nuclear power in Australia?
I absolutely believe that we should be exploring it. I mean, Australia is the only G20 country that does not have nuclear power. We look at countries like Canada, the United States, Korea, Japan, France. They all have a significant amount of their baseload power comes from nuclear. And what we're already seeing in Australia is as we transition to a higher penetration of renewables in our sector, the volatility goes up because they're intermittent power sources by their very nature, by and large. And until we get large-scale storage that's affordable and battery technology doesn't exist, we need some sort of firming capability.